Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through monumental stacks of historical context, biographical sources, and global research to give you the fastest, most insightful understanding of the world's most complex subjects.
And today, we are attempting a feat of historical compression. One that spans 7 whole decades.
We're diving deep into the life and really the unparalleled reign of Queen Elizabeth II.
When you just look at the sheer scale of her tenure, 70 years and 314 days, it's an almost unimaginable stretch of history.
It's hard to even comprehend.
Right. She reigned over 32 sovereign states during her lifetime and 15 realms at her death. She wasn't just the longest reigning British monarch, she was the second longest sovereign ruler in world history, second only to Louis XIV of France.
That kind of longevity, it makes her less of a contemporary political figure and more of a historical anchor. And so our mission today is to provide you with the essential architecture of that reign, tracing her path from, well, an unexpected, almost accidental heir to a global figurehead who really mastered the art of constitutional restraint while adapting the monarchy to seismic political and social change.
We've distilled a massive body of source material to focus on 3 core themes: dedication, transformation, and, I think, resilience.
Okay.
We're going to unpack her foundational pledge of service, the major constitutional shifts she oversaw, the personal challenges like the 1992 annus horribilis, and most importantly, the strategic moves she made to preserve the relevance of the crown in a fiercely modernizing world.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental journey, starting with the simple fact that the girl who became queen, she was never supposed to be queen at all.
Not at all. She was born Elizabeth Alexandra Mary on April 21st, 1926 in Mayfair, London. And crucially, at the moment of her birth, she was third in line to the throne.
Third, so not even close.
Oh, not even a remote possibility in most people's minds. Her position was behind her uncle Edward, who was the Prince of Wales, and then, of course, her own father, Prince Albert, the Duke of York.
So there was almost zero expectation that she would ever wear the crown.
Zero. And yet, even as a child, she seemed to possess this certain formality, a seriousness that kind of hinted at the role she would eventually take on.
We know she was affectionately called Lilibet by her closest family.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is such a personal, tender detail, a nickname that came from her own attempts to say Elizabeth, right?
Exactly. And it just gets so quickly overwhelmed by the immense formality of her future life.
It really does.
It truly contrasts with the image of the monarch.
Mm.
She and her sister, Margaret, who was born in 1930, they were educated privately at home.
Right, so no public school?
No, the instruction was primarily in history, languages, literature, and music. But she had this innate dignity. It's worth remembering that Winston Churchill, upon observing the 2-year-old princess, commented that she had an air of authority and reflectiveness, astonishing in an infant.
Wow, at 2 years old.
At 2, that character was present from the very start.
She also had a very close relationship with her grandfather, King George V. She called him Grandpa England.
Which is just a wonderful nickname.
It is. And we learned that her visits were publicly credited with significantly raising his spirits during a serious illness he suffered in 1929. But that stability, that entire world was shattered 7 years later.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in 1936 that fundamentally rewrote the destiny of this 10-year-old girl?
That was the abdication crisis. Her uncle, Edward VIII, had succeeded George V, but he chose to abdicate after less than a year on the throne.
And also he could marry Wallis Simpson.
Exactly, a twice-divorced American socialite. His decision was a direct conflict between his royal duty and his personal desire.
And the consequence for Elizabeth was immediate and completely life-changing.
It thrust her father, the Duke of York, into the role of King George VI, and suddenly, this 10-year-old girl, Elizabeth, was elevated to heir presumptive.
That distinction is vital, isn't it? Heir presumptive.
It's a huge distinction.
Yeah.
Because male preference primogeniture was the law of the land at the time.
Meaning a future brother could have jumped ahead of her.
Precisely. She was the heir presumptive, because if her parents had later had a son, that son would have superseded her in the line of succession. So her path was open, but it wasn't guaranteed.
So the very foundation of her future monarchy was built on this unexpected family sacrifice. Her uncle's choice to abandon his duty. That must have just cemented the absolute necessity of service in her mind.
Oh, absolutely. The trauma and the immense sense of duty that this accession brought to her father profoundly influenced her. But those formative years were then immediately plunged into the crisis of the Second World War.
The fortitude the royal family showed during the war is it's legendary, isn't it? Starting with the refusal to evacuate the young princesses to the safety of Canada.
It's one of the most powerful declarations of the entire war. Her mother, Queen Elizabeth, stated it plainly. The children won't go without me. I won't leave without the king, and the king will never leave. This declaration rooted the monarchy in the shared danger and struggle of the British people. The princesses spent 5 years, mostly residing safely within Windsor Castle, but they were active participants.
What did that look like?
They even staged Christmas pantomimes to raise funds for the Queen's Wool Fund, which was buying materials for military garments.
So she quickly began to take on these symbolic duties, starting with her first radio broadcast in 1940.
Yes, aged just 14, during the BBC's Children's Hour. She addressed the evacuated children of the Commonwealth, many of whom were far from home and, terrified.
And her message was simple but powerful.
Incredibly. We're trying, too, to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war. This established a lifetime pattern of connecting the royal family's experience directly to the national experience.
But her service went beyond symbolic broadcasts. Her personal commitment really peaked in 1945 when she entered military service herself.
She had already become Colonel of the Grenadier Guards in 1942, which was her first solo public military appearance. But then in February 1945, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, or ATS.
The women's branch of the British Army?
That's the one. She was an honorary second subaltern. She was even given a service number, 230873.
So the future Queen of England was actually getting grease under her fingernails.
Exactly. She underwent hands-on training as a driver and a mechanic. She was learning to strip and rebuild engines, driving military trucks.
That's incredible.
By July 1945, she was promoted to honorary junior commander, which is the equivalent of a captain. This was not a PR stunt. It was direct, practical participation in the war effort. A deeply unusual action for an heir presumptive, and it cemented her reputation for duty and practical competence among the public.
And the emotional climax of this whole period has to be Victory in Europe Day. We have this wonderful image of her celebrating incognito with the crowds.
It's a beautifully human moment. She and Margaret were allowed to slip out of the palace with a small group of officers and just mingle with the massive crowds celebrating in London.
I can't even imagine.
She later recounted the thrill of the night, recalling being terrified of being recognized, but describing how she linked arms with lines of unknown people and was swept along on a tide of happiness and relief.
A fleeting, necessary moment of anonymous freedom before her life was claimed entirely by the crown.
Which it was, formally, in 1947, during her first major overseas tour. This leads up to a 21st birthday speech.
Right, she was with her parents in southern Africa.
And the broadcast she gave to the entire Commonwealth on her birthday was perhaps the most defining statement of intent she ever made.
The famous declaration.
The famous declaration.
Okay.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
And you have to notice the phrasing. My whole life. It was a public vow of absolute lifelong dedication. It framed her future reign not as a privilege, but as a sacred contract that could never be broken or retired from.
It set the irreversible standard. Now we shift from the accidental princess who served as a mechanic to the young bride and queen who would have to navigate a crumbling global power structure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How did the personal life of the young royal clash with the immense political machinery of the crown?
Well, the romance between Elizabeth and Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark began early. She met him when she was just a girl, but she truly fell in love after meeting him again in 1939 when she was visiting the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth.
But that romance was met with significant resistance, especially in the post-war climate.
He was certainly not the standard choice. I mean, he was foreign-born, had been exiled from Greece as a boy, lacked substantial financial standing, and most controversially, his 4 elder sisters were all married to German noblemen.
Some with clear Nazi links.
Yes, some with very clear Nazi links.
I understand even her own mother initially had serious reservations about the match.
She did. Elizabeth's mother reportedly referred to Philip as the Hun at first.
Wow.
Though she eventually warmed to him, calling him an English gentleman. Despite the controversy and become a naturalized British subject, Elizabeth was absolutely determined.
And they married at Westminster Abbey on November 20th, 1947.
Hmm.
The symbolism of that wedding ceremony itself speaks volumes about post-war Britain, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, despite the spectacular pomp of the event, the country was still gripped by austerity.
And Elizabeth famously had to save up ration coupons for her dress.
Ration coupons to purchase the material needed for her elaborate wedding gown. It was this potent symbol. The monarchy was grand, but the nation was struggling, and even the future queen had to participate in the rationing system.
And it was notable who wasn't invited.
Oh, very notable. Philip's German relatives, including his sisters and the Duke of Windsor Edward VIII, were all excluded from the guest list due to sensitivity.
In a world of increasing duty, the couple did manage to carve out a brief period of near normalcy in the early years of their marriage.
They did, in Malta. Between 1949 and 1951, while Philip was serving as a Royal Navy officer, they lived intermittently at Villa Gardamangia.
And what was that like?
It was, relatively speaking, the life of a typical naval couple. They drove themselves around, they went to parties. It was likely the closest Elizabeth ever came to living a life outside the direct glare of history.
That quiet chapter ended abruptly in February 1952. Walk us through the moment of accession in Kenya.
Her father, George VI, who had struggled with ill health following the strain of the war, died in his sleep. Elizabeth and Philip were on an official tour representing the ailing king.
They were at Treetops Hotel, weren't they?
They had just spent a night there and had returned to Sagana Lodge in Kenya. And it was Philip who delivered the devastating news to his 25-year-old wife. She was queen immediately.
She chose to retain Elizabeth as her regnal name, becoming Elizabeth II, but that choice immediately sparked friction in one of her realms.
It did. Some Scots were offended by the use of the numeral II, as she was technically the first Queen Elizabeth to rule in Scotland. This was a subtle but early indication of the complexities of her new multinational role.
The greater internal battle, however, was about the name of the royal house. The source mentions a significant dispute over whether the House of Windsor would change its name to reflect Prince Philip's lineage.
Oh, this was intensely personal for Philip. The traditionalists, led by Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Queen Mother, Queen Mary, insisted that the house must retain the name of Windsor.
And Philip was furious.
Furious, it led to his famous, bitterly delivered complaint. I am the only man in the country not allowed to give his name to his own children.
So what was the compromise?
Elizabeth eventually declared the house would remain Windsor, upholding the wishes of the establishment, even against her husband. It wasn't until 1960 that a compromise was made, stating that male-line descendants who didn't carry royal titles would use the surname Mountbatten-Windsor.
That incident really speaks volumes about the early tension she faced between her loyalty to Philip and the immense weight of the institution she led.
Absolutely. And the world watched her coronation in June 1953. And this moment was truly revolutionary for public engagement with the monarchy.
A communications watershed.
Exactly. Despite intense resistance from traditionalists, including Churchill, who worried about demeaning the sacred ceremony, Elizabeth insisted the event be televised.
The first time a British coronation had ever been broadcast.
The first time the most sacred elements, the anointing and communion, remained private.
And the impact was immediate.
It was massive. The number of UK television licenses doubled to 3 million almost overnight. It cemented television as the dominant medium in British homes. It brought the spectacle of the monarchy right into people's living rooms, democratizing access to the crown in a way that was previously unimaginable.
And her gown was symbolic, too.
Her coronation gown, embroidered with the floral emblems of Commonwealth countries, visually symbolized her new, modern international focus.
That international focus was immediately put into action. She quickly became the most widely traveled head of state in history.
Just months after her coronation, she undertook a 7-month round-the-world tour, 1953 to 1954. She visited 13 countries, covering an astonishing 40,000 miles.
Incredible.
She was the first reigning British monarch ever to visit countries like Australia and New Zealand, and the crowds were immense. In Australia, it's estimated 3/4 of the entire population saw her during that trip.
And this global travel underscored the biggest constitutional shift of her early reign, the rapid acceleration of decolonization.
Right. Her role was transforming from the head of a declining empire to the head of a voluntary association of sovereign states, the Commonwealth of Nations. This transition required immense political and constitutional agility.
She had to manage the challenge of former colonies choosing to become republics, like India.
Yes, but still wanting to remain part of the Commonwealth. This was an ingenious constitutional compromise that subtly reframed the relationship from one of loyalty to the crown to one of shared values and friendship.
However, this geopolitical transition wasn't smooth. Her constitutional role came under serious domestic fire during the Suez Crisis in 1956 and the subsequent appointment of new prime ministers.
The Suez Crisis was a political disaster that ended the premiership of Anthony Eden. And when Eden resigned in January 1957, the Conservative Party had no formal mechanism for electing a new leader.
So the decision defaulted to the monarch. She had to exercise one of her few remaining reserve powers, commissioning someone to form a government.
Exactly. And she was expected to consult senior party figures, often referred to as the magic circle, to determine who commanded the majority support of the party. She was advised to appoint Harold Macmillan.
But she faced immediate criticism for it.
Immediate criticism that she was acting on advice from an old boys network rather than a democratic process. And this controversy was repeated in 1963 when she appointed Alec Douglas Home.
So the media and the political atmosphere grew uncomfortable with the monarch exercising any political choice, even if she was advised.
That's the key insight. The monarchy had to be seen as apolitical. The public backlash and media scrutiny surrounding those two appointments became so intense that the Conservative Party was compelled to adopt a formal leadership election process in 1965.
Which effectively took her out of that controversial decision-making loop forever.
Exactly. It preserved the neutrality of the crown.
What's fascinating is the personal courage she showed in parallel while dealing with these large geopolitical shifts. The source highlights her 1961 visit to Ghana.
Ghana was hugely important. It had recently become independent under President Kwame Nkrumah, who was leaning toward the Soviet bloc. There were genuine security concerns. Assassins were targeting Nkrumah.
A risky visit.
Politically, very risky. But the Queen dismissed safety fears and went anyway. Harold Macmillan noted her calmness and courage, recognizing that her presence cemented Ghana's place in the Commonwealth when it could have easily broken away.
She even broke ground by visiting a communist country.
Yes, in 1972, she became the first British monarch to visit a communist country when she toured Yugoslavia and met President Tito. These acts weren't just state visits, they were strategic diplomatic efforts, leveraging her soft power.
Her commitment to constitutional restraint was really tested to its limit during the 1975 Australian constitutional crisis. The Australian Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, was dismissed by the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, and the public immediately looked to the Queen to intervene.
And she refused. She stated firmly that she would not interrupt decisions reserved specifically for the Governor-General under the Constitution of Australia.
She had the power to intervene, though.
She had the power, but she realized that doing so would undermine the independence of the Australian constitutional process.
So she essentially sacrificed popular involvement and the ability to save the situation in order to preserve constitutional integrity.
Precisely. Her refusal taught future realms that the monarch would not save them from their own constitutions. It was a pure, deliberate demonstration of the limits of her reserved powers, even though the crisis itself significantly boosted Republican sentiment in Australia.
Moving into the 1980s, the dangers to the crown shifted from constitutional ambiguity to physical threats and intense media scrutiny. Let's start with the literal threats to her life in 1981.
That year was marked by two significant assassination attempts. The first occurred during the Tripping the Colours ceremony in London. As she rode her favorite horse, Burmese, down the hall, 6 blanks were fired at her from the crowd.
By a 17-year-old.
A 17-year-old assailant who was later jailed. The most remarkable thing was her reaction.
She maintained incredible composure, didn't she?
She did. She was shaken. But she expertly controlled the panicked horse and just continued the parade with immense dignity. Then, later that same year, while on a visit to New Zealand, another 17-year-old, Christopher John Lewis, fired a shot from a .22 rifle from an overlooking building in Dunedin.
And he missed her.
Narrowly missed her.
And Lewis was only charged with unlawful possession of a firearm, which is just extraordinary considering the context.
It speaks to the bizarre nature of the security around the monarchy at the time. Lewis was actually involved in a subsequent attempt to assassinate Prince Charles 2 years later. These close calls exposed vulnerabilities and ultimately intensified the need for stricter security reforms.
The security concerns culminated in a deeply embarrassing incident in 1982. The Michael Fagan intrusion.
That was a catastrophic lapse. Fagan, an unemployed decorator, scaled the walls, navigated corridors, and managed to enter her private bedroom in Buckingham Palace where she was sleeping.
He woke her up.
He woke her up. And the Queen handled the situation by calmly engaging him in conversation until security finally arrived. The incident deeply shocked the nation. The sanctum of the Queen's bedroom had been breached, leading to immediate high-level security reviews.
At the same time, the political realm was defined by her relationship with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. There were frequent rumors of tension, particularly over foreign policy.
And there were concrete instances of disagreement. In 1983, the Queen was reportedly angered when the U.S. administration ordered the invasion of Grenada, one of her Caribbean realms, without informing her as head of state.
A significant diplomatic breach.
A huge breach, and the disagreement over apartheid South Africa was much more public, and it fundamentally concerned the integrity of the Commonwealth.
Right, the reports in the Sunday Times.
Yes. In 1986, the paper suggested Elizabeth was profoundly worried that Thatcher's economic policies were fostering deep social divisions at home, pointing to high unemployment and the violence of the miners' strikes. But the biggest political friction was Thatcher's steadfast refusal to apply sanctions against the apartheid regime in South Africa.
And how do we know these rumors weren't just media embellishment?
Because of later testimony. While the palace often downplayed these reports, Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney later confirmed that Elizabeth was an effective, behind-the-scenes force in applying pressure and ending apartheid.
So her political views rarely surfaced, but when they concerned the survival of the Commonwealth, she found ways to exert influence.
Exactly. On a more diplomatic note, her 1986 state visit to Communist China was crucial for Britain's future interests.
It was pioneering.
She became the first British monarch to visit the People's Republic of China, touring historic sites like the Forbidden City and the Great Wall. And this visit was pivotal because it signified mutual acceptance between Britain and China of the planned 1997 transfer of Hong Kong, giving the process a sense of official legitimacy.
All these challenges, security breaches, political disagreements, diplomatic tightropes, they all culminated in 1992, the year she famously called her annus horribilis.
The term, Latin for horrible year, was delivered in her speech marking her Ruby Jubilee, and it felt like the institution of the monarchy was simply collapsing around her.
The family breakdowns were relentless.
Absolutely. Prince Andrew and Sarah separated, Princess Anne divorced Captain Mark Phillips, and Prince Charles and Diana formally separated in December.
And then the fire at Windsor Castle, one of her primary residences, seemed to symbolize the destruction of the old regime.
The fire in November 1992 was catastrophic. It caused massive damage and immediately catalyzed intense public scrutiny, not just over the tragedy, but over who should pay for the estimated $40 million in repairs.
Right, Republican sentiment soared.
It did, fueled by the family drama, but primarily by concerns over financial transparency. The public was asking why they should fund the repairs for the Queen's residences when she was reportedly one of the wealthiest women in the world.
And this public pressure directly resulted in major financial reforms for the crown.
It did. The political pressure became overwhelming, forcing the monarchy to modernize its finances drastically. It was announced that Elizabeth would begin paying income tax from 1993 onwards, and the civil list, the system for funding the royal household, was significantly reduced.
A critical moment.
A critical moment where Republican sentiment successfully forced transparency and accountability. She also showed she was ready to fight back, successfully suing The Sun for publishing her Christmas message early, forcing them to pay legal fees and a large charitable donation.
The ultimate crisis of that decade, however, was the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales, in August 1997. This was the moment the public's emotional demands clashed most dramatically with the monarchy's traditional instinct.
This crisis required the Queen to take a calculated, deeply uncomfortable constitutional risk. After Diana's death, the royal family retreated to Balmoral to shield William and Harry. The monarchical instinct was private grief and stoicism.
But the media and the public demanded a public theatrical performance of grief.
They really did. The family's silence and the initial failure to fly the Union Jack flag at half-mast over Buckingham Palace caused widespread dismay. The backlash was visceral.
It was intense. The hostility became intense. Polls showed the monarchy's popularity plummeting.
The Queen realized that adherence to traditional protocol was actively endangering the institution. She was pressured to return to London, and on September 5th, the day before Diana's funeral, she delivered a live, televised address to the nation.
And in that speech, she made a deliberate strategic choice with her language.
Oh, absolutely. She didn't speak merely as the monarch or head of state. She consciously chose to speak as a grandmother, offering admiration for Diana and articulated the difficulty of their shared grief.
That shift, choosing a personal emotional title over her formal role, was unprecedented.
Completely. It was a calculated humanization of the crown designed to meet the public's demand for emotion, and it worked instantly. Public hostility just evaporated almost immediately. The institution was saved not by following tradition, but by deliberately breaking it to connect personally.
She finished that challenging year with another act of powerful diplomatic courage, her controversial visit to India.
Her visit to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre site in India in October 1997 was fraught with tension. Protesters were chanting, "Killer Queen, go back." But after she and Philip laid a wreath at the memorial, the fury softened. It was another example of her willingness to face historical friction and rely on her personal presence and quiet, respectful gestures to diffuse intense political situations.
As we move into the 21st century, Elizabeth II's reign transitions from constant firefighting and crisis management to becoming an internationally respected anchor of global stability. We see a clear statement of solidarity immediately after the 9/11 attacks.
Yes, in a powerful, deeply felt break with tradition, she ordered the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, to be played during the changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace.
A small but highly visible gesture.
A gesture of solidarity that resonated globally and showed her capacity for emotional diplomacy.
The start of the new century, however, was also marked by deep personal sorrow, right before a major milestone.
Her Golden Jubilee in 2002, marking 50 years on the throne, followed the deaths of her sister, Princess Margaret, and her mother, the Queen Mother, within just 2 months of each other.
So the media speculated the Jubilee might be subdued.
They did, but Elizabeth proceeded with an extensive tour, starting in Jamaica, and the celebrations in London saw immense public enthusiasm, with over 1 million attendees daily. Her personal resilience in the face of such profound private loss seemed to fuel a surge of public support for the institution.
She continued to navigate modern realities, including taking on the aggressive tabloid press in court.
In 2003, she successfully sued the Daily Mirror for breach of confidence after a reporter managed to pose as a footman inside Buckingham Palace to gather information.
And she won?
She won, forcing the paper to cover her substantial legal costs. That same year, despite being generally healthy, she underwent keyhole surgery on both knees, a sign that the physical demands of her role were beginning to catch up with her.
But the milestones just kept accumulating, redefining historical norms.
She became the longest-lived British monarch in 2007. And then, the monumental achievement came on September 9, 2015, when she surpassed her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, to become the longest-reigning British monarch in history.
That must have been a subtle but profound challenge stepping out of Victoria's immense shadow.
Indeed. She was the first British monarch to commemorate a Sapphire Jubilee, that's 65 years, in 2017. And later that year, she and Philip celebrated their platinum wedding anniversary. Characteristically, in her speech marking the longest reign, she noted she had never aspired to achieve the milestone, highlighting her focus on service over records.
Her later years were defined by critical diplomatic efforts, particularly the 2011 state visit to the Republic of Ireland.
That was truly a watershed moment. It was the first state visit by a British monarch to the Republic of Ireland since its independence. Her personal diplomacy, including a visit to the Garden of Remembrance and delivering a few words in Irish, marked a massive step forward in Anglo-Irish relations.
Healing centuries of friction.
It really was. She was being recognized globally for her role as an anchor. She addressed the UN General Assembly a second time in 2010, where she was specifically introduced as an anchor for our age.
The 2012 Diamond Jubilee demonstrated her willingness to embrace modernization and even self-deprecating humor on a global stage. We can't talk about that celebration without discussing her surprising cinematic debut.
Well, the short film for the opening ceremony of the London Olympic Games was iconic. She appeared alongside Daniel Craig as James Bond.
And the scene culminating in the Queen parachuting into the stadium, it was a moment of pure, unexpected humor.
It demonstrated a truly modern approach to her role, suggesting that even the ultimate symbol of tradition could poke fun at itself.
It's reported that her staff were absolutely shocked that she agreed to this.
They were stunned. But the Queen saw the strategic value in this highly public, self-deprecating act. It humanized her on a global level to billions of viewers. She later received an honorary BAFTA award for her patronage of the film industry.
In the last decade of her life, there was a visible, smooth transition of duties to Prince Charles, ensuring a soft succession plan.
She started reducing her long-haul travel, and Charles started representing her more. This transition was formally cemented in 2018 when Commonwealth heads announced that Prince Charles would succeed her as head of the Commonwealth.
Which she publicly stated was her sincere wish.
hmm And then came the ultimate period of isolation and reflection, the COVID-19 pandemic,
She moved to Windsor Castle in March 2020.
and lived under an extremely strict sanitary protocol, affectionately nicknamed HMS Bubble. The Queen used this moment to directly connect with the nation's struggle. Her televised address during the pandemic was a poignant moment, watched by 24 million UK viewers, where she consciously echoed the language and fortitude of her childhood wartime experience.
She drew that direct line from 1940 to 2020, promising, "Better days will return, we will be with our friends again, we will meet again."
Incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But the isolation intensified with the death of Prince Philip in April 2021 after 73 years of marriage. She was now the first British monarch to reign as a widow since Queen Victoria.
And the image of her sitting entirely alone at his funeral service due to COVID restrictions, it resonated globally as a profound symbol of duty and personal sacrifice.
It showed the world that even the Queen was subject to the same public health restrictions as everyone else, demanding personal grief be set aside for civic obedience.
Despite this immense personal sorrow and increasing health issues, she battled COVID-19 and suffered from episodic mobility problems. She reached her Platinum Jubilee, 70 years.
She renewed her lifetime commitment in her Accession Day message and continued to make surprise public appearances, including officially opening the Elizabeth Line Railway in London.
Her final constitutional duty occurred just 2 days before her death, appointing Liz Truss as her 15th British Prime Minister.
She received Liz Truss at Balmoral, marking the only occasion she did not receive a new Prime Minister at Buckingham Palace or Windsor during her 70 years. That single fact, appointing 15 British prime ministers plus 14 other prime ministers across her realms, speaks to the sheer scope and unprecedented nature of her constitutional service, which she literally fulfilled right up until the very end.
Let's delve into how Elizabeth II managed to maintain such high levels of popular support, often serving as the constitutional safety net for the institution, even when the rest of the royal family came under intense scrutiny. It all seems to begin with her personal sense of duty and faith.
Her deep sense of religious and civic duty was the absolute core of her character. She took her coronation oath, which established her as Supreme Governor of the Church of England, incredibly seriously. She was also a dedicated member of the Church of Scotland.
And she often gave us glimpses into this personal faith through her annual Christmas message.
Indeed. Her Christmas broadcasts evolved over the years, becoming increasingly personal. In her 2000 message, for example, she made it clear, "For me, the teachings of Christ and my own personal accountability before God provide a framework in which I try to lead my life."
That emphasis on personal accountability must have resonated deeply with the public.
I think so. They saw her actions as stemming from a genuine moral commitment rather than mere political obligation. She also actively supported interfaith relations, meeting 5 different popes during her lifetime.
Beyond the serious duty, her character was defined by her passions: horses and dogs.
They were her respite. She was a keen equestrian and remained an active rider well into her 90s, overseeing her racing stables and attending major events like Royal Ascot. And of course, there were her dogs.
The corgis.
Her Pembroke Welsh Corgis, a line that started with Dookie in 1933. These interests provided a vital counterpoint to the formality of her public life. The rare scenes that surfaced, showing her relaxed, perhaps preparing meals or washing dishes with her family, helped soften the monarchy's distant image.
Her public image evolved significantly over her reign. Initially in the 1950s, she was the fairy tale queen. How did she modernize that image to maintain relevance?
Well, the turning point was often considered the controversial television documentary Royal Family in the late 1960s, which gave the public a brief glimpse behind the scenes. However, her most critical innovation in public engagement was instituting the first royal walkabout,
What was that exactly?
leaving the protection of the royal enclosure to directly greet and interact with ordinary people. She did it first during a 1970 tour of Australia and New Zealand.
And the walkabout became standard practice, transforming public access to the monarchy.
It did. It allowed people to physically connect with the monarch. And her wardrobe became functional, part of that strategy. She adopted a signature style of solid-color overcoats and decorative, often brightly colored hats.
Which wasn't just about fashion.
Not at all. It was explicitly designed to ensure she could be seen easily in any crowd. The strategy worked. By the end of her reign, almost 1/3 of Britons claimed to have seen or met her in person.
Even though her personal approval ratings were sky high, we noted that support for the institution itself fluctuated, hitting a low point in the 1990s.
The criticism was almost always directed at the conduct of the wider family or the perceived cost of the monarchy, never at the Queen's own dedication. Her personal popularity served as a crucial constitutional shield, especially in the realms outside the UK.
We see this constitutional power play out specifically in referenda concerning whether her realms should become republics.
Exactly. In Australia's 1999 referendum, the proposal to become a republic was rejected by voters. Several Australian politicians, even those who were personally Republican, later acknowledged that the issue should wait until after her reign.
Right. Malcolm Turnbull, a former Republican prime minister, noted that in Australia there were simply more Elizabethans than there are monarchists.
The person was more popular than the political structure she represented. It's the ultimate soft power checkmate. Her personal popularity acted as a pause button on Republican movements globally.
Even in other places.
Oh yes, referendums in Tuvalu in 2008 and St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2009 also rejected proposals to ditch the monarchy. Even amid later turbulence involving her family members, her approval remained incredibly high. She was the third most admired woman globally in the annual Gallup poll, having appeared in the top 10 more than any other woman in the poll's history.
On September 8, 2022, the longest reign in British history came to an end. It was announced suddenly after Buckingham Palace issued a stark statement that doctors were, quote, concerned for Her Majesty's health.
Her immediate family rushed to Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, where she died peacefully that afternoon, aged 96. Her death immediately activated Operation London Bridge, the plan for her funeral and accession.
And because she died in Scotland, another plan was activated.
The localized plan, Operation Unicorn, was also put into motion. She was the first monarch to die in Scotland since James V in 1542.
The official cause of death was recorded as old age. However, some sources, including a biographer and former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, later suggested she may have been suffering from multiple myeloma, a form of bone marrow cancer.
Regardless of the precise medical cause, the transition of power was immediate and seamless. She was succeeded instantly by her eldest son, Charles III, who was proclaimed king. The subsequent period of national mourning was unprecedented in its scale.
The public's response began in Scotland with the lying in state at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh.
It was an intensely moving scene. The crown of Scotland was placed atop her coffin, and approximately 33,000 members of the public filed past in Edinburgh. After the coffin was flown to London, the scale just grew exponentially.
It lay in state at Westminster Hall for 4 days,
where an estimated 250,000 members of the public queued for hours to pay their respects. This period also saw her children and grandchildren hold silent vigils around the coffin.
The state funeral on September 19, 2022, was a historic event, televised globally.
It was the first monarch's funeral service held at Westminster Abbey since George II in 1760. More than 1 million people lined the streets of central London in silence. The guest list included hundreds of heads of state, reflecting her enormous global standing.
And the final procession at Windsor Castle contained some deeply personal touches.
Her fell pony, Emma, and her 2 royal corgis were waiting at the side as the procession approached.
And her final resting place reunited her with the man who was her strength and stay.
She was interred with Prince Philip in the King George VI Memorial Chapel at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, during a private family ceremony later that evening. It marked the closure of a chapter spanning over 7 decades of continuous public service.
It truly is staggering when you look at the historical sweep of her life. She was born when Calvin Coolidge was U.S. president.
Yeah.
She oversaw the premierships of 15 British leaders, from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss. She witnessed the British Empire dissolve and transform into a voluntary commonwealth of 56 nations. She maintained consistency, stability, and constitutional discipline throughout decades of seismic political and social upheaval.
She fulfilled the vow she made as a 21-year-old in 1947, absolutely. Her commitment to service was total, and that constancy is why the world ultimately respected her so much.
Right. We often hear criticism that she was aloof or emotionally distant, particularly during the Diana crisis.
But we must understand that her restraint was not apathy. It was constitutional discipline born from that sacred, lifelong promise.
The complexity of our constitutional role, the separation of the personal self from the political machinery of the state, must have demanded an almost impossible level of endurance.
It demanded everything. And that brings us back to the core element of her dedication. The sources tell us that in 2002, she told the Canadian Governor-General, Adrienne Clarkson, that she would never abdicate. stating firmly, it is not our tradition.
So she added a qualifier.
She did. She said, although I suppose if I became completely gaga, one would have to do something.
That conviction that her duty was for life, regardless of circumstances or personal cost or even political unpopularity, is perhaps the most revealing detail about her character.
Indeed. It forces us to consider the ultimate question of her legacy. How did this foundational conviction that her commitment was permanent and irrevocable shape her reliance on rigorous constitutional restraint?
And more importantly, how did this resolve, this dedication to never give up, never despair, the phrase she used during her VE Day 75 message, ultimately preserve the relevance of the monarchy in an era where almost every other country modernized by reducing or eliminating their royal houses?
Her lifelong commitment to the vow she made in 1947 is, I think, the ultimate explanation for why the crown survived her unprecedented deep dive through history.